Hello, everybody. I'm Paul Levine. I'm guest hosting today on Authors on the Air, and we are so happy to have with us Jeff Burnside, award winning investigative journalist, and now the author of a biography, the very intriguing title, Cashup Davis, not Catchup, not Ketchup, Cashup Davis,
Yeah.
The Inspiring Life of a Secret Mentor. Hello, Jeff.
Hey, Paul, how have you been?
Just fine,
Good.
thank you. What's the story that brought you to writing a biography of a late 19th century character? And I'm going to say character with a capital C.
Yes, that's right. He's an eccentric Old West pioneer. It's just an amazing story. Now, let me just say, my co-author, Gordy Davis, is a friend of mine, and it's Cashup Davis is his great grandfather. For years, Gordy would tell me about this guy, Cashup, with the funny nickname. And I said, Gordy, you should write a book about this guy. And he said, well, you're the journalist. Why don't you do it? And I said, let's do it together. So the story is told through Gordy's eyes. Cashup Davis was his great grandfather, this pioneer in the Old West, who eccentric character, as you say, who inexplicably had this obsession with building a grand hotel on top of a mountain in the Old West when there were only a few hundred white settlers there. Everyone told me he was crazy, but he'd been successful lavishly at everything he'd ever done and followed his instinct. It was a huge success, but then it started to teeter and finally went out of business, and Cashup lost everything. So it's really a story about life lessons that we're learning from this guy 135 years ago, that Gordy seems to have sought in his very successful life to illuminate his own good success. I think he went on his journey of self-discovery, looking for his great grandfather to learn from. So they're life lessons for all of us. For example, Paul, the biggest question is in the book is what will your legacy be? And do you chase your dreams, or do you listen to the doubters? And how do you define success? These are all lessons of today that are illuminated by this mesmerizing story from 135 years ago.
Well, let's talk about 1888,
Yeah.
which is when Cashup Davis built this hotel in the middle of nowhere
Yeah.
against all good advice, one would think.
Yeah.
1888, also when Thomas Edison was working in his lab in New Jersey. It's when George Eastman patented the Kodak camera. What was it about these people? You used the word pioneers, which is a great word for them. What inspired Cashup, first of all, to go west, and then secondly, to do this impossible project?
This is a magnificent question, and I'm not sure we'll ever know the answer. One of the chapters is subtitled, I'll know when I get there. So I think Cashup had this instinct in his early life in Great Britain, an overachiever at a young age, and he was obsessed with living on the edge of Western settlement in America, as many Europeans were. And so he literally hops on a boat in a youthful age and comes to America and gradually starts going farther and farther west. Back then, the Old West was Ohio, but he continued out west and lived among tribes. You know, remember, we call them pioneers. The Native Americans called them invaders. But he always managed, I think in part because he came from Britain where they didn't have this native population. He managed to respect them and live among them in a geographic sense. And so he had always been successful. I think immigration is self-selecting of an enterprising people. I do. Maybe you agree. Cashup was one of them. So he made a fortune several times, and as a rancher and a farmer in wheat. This is magnificent wheat country in the Palouse area of Washington State with this absurdly nutrient-rich soil. And then he always believed in his instinct because it had always worked for him. And it was his instinct to build this hotel. And it turned out to be not such a great instinct. So that's another life lesson. And, you know, follow your dreams, but keep your feet on the ground as well, Paul. I think we've frozen. So I'm not sure if you're getting me, Paul. There we go. Pam has stepped in.
Let's go ahead and continue. Paul might be frozen in time there.
Yes.
Of course, that's okay. What made you decide to write this book?
Thanks for stepping in, Pam. And Paul will unfreeze soon, I'm sure.
He will.
I think it's just, and actually I should say we're also doing a documentary on this story too,
Wonderful.
because it's so mesmerizing, has so many layers to the onion as we reveal all these new facets of Cashup's life. I think it's a great life lessons book that we can all glean, no matter where you are in the country or the world, really. And so I think that that's the story that you take away from this book. It's yes, it's a story about a pioneer, but it's also a story about amazing life lessons we can all use.
Boy, you're not kidding. Tell
Mm.
me about the documentary.
Thanks for asking. Yeah, so so I live in both the TV world, as you know, Pam. I'm a
Yes.
longtime investigative reporter on TV,
Yes.
and in the text world. So not all journalists can do that. So while we did the researching and the writing, we really created two products, the book as well as the film. And I think that there'll be some synergies there as well. So the film will probably come out in a year, maybe a year and a half or 2 years. We don't have a platform yet. We're not finished with it. But there's already great interest in stepping into this documentary team. And so, we have this vision. The vision might end up being much bigger. So we'll see how it goes. We're going to have some expensive lunches in Hollywood.
I imagine you would. Well, so let's talk about the difference between, you were talking about text and film.
Yeah.
Writing a book is very different than mapping out a documentary for film.
Mm-hmm.
Will you be doing that both? I mean, you've done the book. Will you be doing the film as well?
Yes, I'll do the narration for the film, since that's kind of what I do. And I know what kind of tone and pace and cadence I want. It's going to be a very cinematic piece, film. And you're right. It's the same story, different storytelling platform, and that's exciting to me. So the pace and the timeline in the film is different than the book. There'll be some similarities, no question about it. And Pam, when you read the book, I think you'll find that I naturally write very conversationally, because that's the way we write for TV. And there's some curmudgeons that didn't like that. But I do, and it's just like sitting down and talking with a friend. I think that we also try to drive people from one chapter to the next, which is kind of a TV thing to do. So when you get to the end of one chapter, my prediction, Pam, is you won't be able to resist reading the next chapter.
Well, I like the idea of reading this historical story. I'm not particularly a lover of historical fiction, but this is not fiction. This is the real McCoy.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm stepping away. Paul, are you with us again?
Yes, a little internet crash in Santa Barbara, California.
That's okay. I'm going to leave you alone to talk. It's been a pleasure for me to talk to Jeff too. Have at it.
Pam, you were very smooth in that whole transition.
Oh, thank you.
What a pinch hitter. But isn't it something? And I'm going to tie this to Cashup Davis. What would Cashup Davis think from 1888, when he built the hotel, to 2023, if he was born 100 years later, that you're in the state of Washington, Pam is in the state of Florida, I'm in California. We are all talking and communicating and seeing each other. If Cashup were alive today, what would he be into? Space exploration, the James Webb Telescope, or what?
I think he'd be in the media. He had a bit of an ego, let's face it. And in fact, we explored this notion that to be as ambitious and successful as he was in his day, you all have to have a little swagger and self-confidence. And I think we examine whether, how you measure that and how you're not stepping over your bounds of possibilities. So he was a big promoter. He would be one of those guys who, when he came into the nearby town, the newspaper reporter would go there. There would be a crowd around him, and it would be a story in the paper the next day. So I think he'd definitely be in the media. He'd have a big social media platform, no doubt.
And a show on CNN.
Yeah.
Because the subtitle has the intriguing words, "The Inspiring Life of a Secret Mentor." What has his great-grandson Gordy, and what have you been able to learn that would be relevant in our lives today?
Yeah, Gordy got very emotional, frankly, when we started peeling away the onion. There are some things in the book where you think the story is over. We alluded to the fact that his hotel went out of business and that he died alone. There's nothing to dodge on that. Lost his family. He was estranged from everyone. But just when you think the story is done, then there's another element that springs forward and makes you happy again. And that is one of the things that that made Gordy cry. Gordy is this very successful, thick-fingered, cigar-chomping Texan who is got this gruff exterior, but he's got a heart of gold. And he really teared up when we found it's got two surprise endings. He really teared up when he saw them both. So I don't want to spoil it for the readers, but
right.
um,
But
so yes. Go ahead.
Wouldn't it be true that these pioneers, these inventors, these people who saw things that others didn't, often would have this soaring success or be on the verge of success, but something would turn against? I'm thinking of Tesla, who was Edison's great competitor with electricity, who died alone and virtually starving in a hotel room.
Yeah.
Tragedy seems to accompany characters like this.
I think you're right. I think it's because they swing for the fence so often, and not every pitch is going to be a home run. But that's part of success. That's part of risk and reward, which is another theme that we talk about in great detail in this book. Gordy's success came with tremendous risk. I mean, he risked it all more than once and had some failures, but he became extremely wealthy and is now a philanthropist, giving away more than $70 million to various universities. I mean, he's up there.
When Cassius Davis had his stagecoach, what would it be?
Stagecoach stop, they call it.
Stagecoach stop, and I guess they would feed the horses and feed the people. Mm-hmm. He was successful, but he wasn't satisfied with that. Right. And in my mind, I see him looking up at the top of that mountain or that butte and seeing something nobody else could see. Yeah. What do you think was, having studied him, what was going through his mind to build a hotel on top of this lonely mountain?
So I'm getting chills just listening to how you describe that, because it's exactly what I imagine happened to him. His stagecoach stop, which was located by complete chance, ended up being on the midpoint between two cities, just in the right spot for stagecoaches to stop and feed the horses. And then he was a huge entertainer, so he made a fortune. He was in the New York newspapers. I mean, he was a celebrity even back then. And then the trains came in, put all the stagecoaches and their stops out of business. And he'd been looking at that darn mountain for years. And in fact, my research finds that he actually talked to somebody about building the hotel many years before he actually did it. So here's a guy who went out of business but then pivoted. He had this vision, and he had literally vision. I mean, that is the word. He had several inventions that helped advance wheat farming and harvesting. He did some really innovative things with apple orchards and fruit trees to feed his guests all year long, just about. So he was a real innovator. Again, I think by necessity of the pioneer spirit, but his has always been like that, even when he was in England. So, and he loves people, he loves adulation, he loves dancing all night long. So I think he saw the hotel as an extension of his stagecoach stop in a really, really grand fashion.
And if we didn't have some of those people with vision and seeing things that we don't see, we might not be the people we are today.
So true. Our world would be very different in ways that we can't even fathom. Yeah, absolutely. And even though he was a pioneer and the stuff he did never really left the Palouse, I think that you'll find in the book, one of his legacies is his family that he didn't realize at the time. The Davis family went on to do amazing things, least of whom is Gordy.
Well, something in the genetics there. Jeff, what about Jeff Burnside? What's next for you?
Thanks for asking. So I love writing books. I know you've done a bazillion books, and I'm frankly so grateful that you're here talking with me today. Thank you again for that. I have 6, 7, 8 more books identified, most of which are true stories, 1 or 2 based on a true story, because as a journalist, I'm drawn to the factual. And so as soon as this one is launched and fully away from my fingertips, I'll start on the next one. And I anticipate it's going to be about some of my work as a journalist, as an investigative reporter. And I think it's based on a dog that I rescued. And but there's so much more to it than that. So I'll have to.
That's a good teaser. That's a very good teaser. Yeah. And for the people who don't know, who are listening and watching, you have a long career as a television investigative reporter, many awards won. long history in Miami, Florida. Now you're in the Northwest.
Yeah.
What's the difference in Miami and Seattle? You have a little thought there?
Night and day, frankly. The topography, the weather, the people, the attitude, both great things and great in both places, no question about it. Seattle is my home, the Northwest. It's one of the few places in Seattle where you can look to the east and to the west and see snow-covered mountain ranges and have the ocean at your feet. And so it's a really unusual and rare place. So I love it here.
Well, Cash Davis, The Inspiring Life of a Secret Mentor, is off to a great start. First printing sold out. They're back printing more books right now. It's gotten tremendous reviews and publicity. Seattle Times magazine, 12 pages, which is memorable for two reasons. Number one, they still have a Sunday magazine at the Seattle Times, which most papers don't.
Right.
And number two, for a book to get that kind of widespread publicity and dissemination is quite wonderful, and speaks really well of your efforts and your execution of this project.
Well, thanks. A great team at the Seattle Times. My hat's off to them. I mentioned the story to them. They said, well, send something to me. And thank goodness, they were so intrigued with it that they really, really ran with it. They did a great job. And by the way, do you like my coffee cup? I don't know if you can see it.
Oh,
look at
for
that.
the people at home, Cheater's Game was my book, which was my fictional take on a true story, and that is the ongoing college admission scandal. And it is still ongoing almost 3 years after it started. It's sort of like COVID.
This is my subliminal advertising.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It has been a great pleasure speaking with you. Any other thoughts, Jeff, that you would like to leave us with from Cash Davis or Gordon Davis? What would you like us to carry away from this book?
Two things. The website, before I forget, is cashupdavis.com. All the information is there. As you mentioned, Amazon ran out of books, but they should have more soon. But if you want it in the meantime, wsupress.edu. Get it directly from the publisher. They have a supply there. I think the other lasting message is get in the game. Ask yourself, what will your legacy be? No matter what the answer is, just get in the game and fight hard for what you believe in and do stuff with your life, because we only have so many days on this beautiful planet. It's a beautiful life. And whether you lose or win, fail or succeed, just try. I think that's the lesson from Cash Davis.
Right. Let your reach exceed your grasp, or what's a heaven for?
Yeah, that's right. Get out of your comfort zone.
Wonderful. Thank you again, Jeff. Thank you so much. This has been fun.
Thank you.